Thank you so much for giving me a whole 30 minutes to tell you about an absolutely mind-blowing event that I attended last August. And I'll start by explaining how I even got connected with this inspirational organization called Launch Canada. Over the summer, I teach a course called The Science of Spaceflight. And last July, during a class, one of my students came up to me and said, "So, Launch Canada is coming up in August. You must be going." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she explained that her boyfriend is on the York University rocketry team, which I had never heard of. And every August, the team makes the 7 hour drive up to Timmins, Ontario, to participate in a Canada-wide student rocketry competition called the Launch Canada Challenge. After class that day, I looked up this event on the internet, and within about 30 seconds, I had clicked on the volunteer button. And a week later, I found myself in my very first Zoom meeting with the event organizers. And I very quickly explained I have absolutely no practical experience in rocketry, that everything I know about rocket science is entirely academic and therefore useless in any practical, any real life scenario. And they assured me that as long as I could withstand dehydration, fatigue, heat, and cold for long periods of time, that I would be useful. And I said, I can do those things. So I was assigned to the media and communications team. There we go. And my duties were to get coverage of the event, to create content for the Launch Canada social media pages, which I very diligently did. I now have hours and hours of video of awesome stories and interviews with students and parents and sponsors and launch operators and safety inspectors and even two Klingon impersonators. And now I just need to find the time to extract the good stuff and get it up on their websites. And unfortunately, at this time of year, that's been going really slowly owing to my silly paid job, which I now want to quit and become a full-time rocket competition follower. But in any case, I can at least tell you all about the event, share some of my content so far, and also if this stuff blows your mind as much as it did mine, I can let you know how you can be a part of advancing Canadian talent in aerospace, which is becoming more and more important these days as near Earth orbit becomes increasingly dominated by other countries. Okay, so first of all, here is what the event looked like. The first 2 days are a conference that take place in a community center arena in the city of Timmins. And on those days, the student rocketry team set up their rockets on tables, and sponsors and guests are all walking around to see all the rockets. And just so that we all understand what what kind of rockets we're talking about, these are not toy rockets. They are rockets as tall as nearly 20 feet. They're able to reach altitudes of tens of thousands of feet, and they are all designed and built by students. So there are about 30 rocketry teams from universities all across Canada, including two high school teams, which is really impressive. And what I was really struck by as I walked around and interviewed students was the amount of collaboration that went on between the teams. In one of my interviews, I described the scene as the most uncompetitive competition that you can imagine. And I said this because during the conference, as well as during the launches after the conference, that students are chatting with other teams, they're getting help from each other, sometimes really critical help. Like sometimes they're loaning each other parts because ultimately all teams wanted all the other teams to get their rockets off the ground. So it was really amazing to witness this shared desire to support each other in order to showcase as much Canadian aerospace talent as possible. In addition to the table exhibits on the other side of the arena, there were talks that were going on throughout the day by various players in the Canadian aerospace scene. And the student teams all had to give a talk as well on their rocket projects. And then lastly, the most important thing that was going on at the conference is that the teams all have to get their rockets inspected. And this was a very intensive process and quite stressful for the students, even though the inspectors were extremely supportive. But regardless, each inspection took about an hour. And the point of the point of this first stage of inspections was to identify any issues that would prevent the rocket from being cleared for launch so that the students still had time to correct these issues before their pre-launch inspections at the launch site. Because at that point, if there were still issues, the students were not allowed to bring their rocket to a launch pad. To kick off the safety inspections, Launch Canada brought in two Klingon impersonators to pretend to conduct an inspection of the first team that was ready. This was purely a performative or ceremonial inspection. The team had an actual inspection with real rocket experts prior to the Klingon version. But of course, I had to catch this on video. And later that day, I happened to run into the Klingons at the food truck outside, which I also caught on video. And then later on, I stitched it all together for the Launch Canada website, which I will share with you because it is quite hilarious.
I am Commander Klarnok of the Safety Commission from Konosh, and I'm here to take a look at your human technology to make sure that it fits standards not only here on Earth, but on Konosh. Have you looked at our safety regulations?
I think so, yes.
We took a little look. It's very different here. Can you show me your parachute?
Main parachute or drogue parachute? We got both.
We're going to need to take a look at both. I'm glad to see that you have both. Moke, do you think these fins will come off?
No. They look like they're going to be pretty sturdy. Are they expected to survive the flight?
I sure hope so.
Excellent.
I see you have added, let me get this right. The human word for that is a hamburger. It makes sense that that would be so close to the flame as you humans insist on burning your meat.
She's just referring to a sticker that was on the rocket.
Katlo. Thank you.
Klingon inspectors eat for lunch.
Well, we are on Earth, so unfortunately, we've discovered that humans kill their food before they serve it. So we are going to try burgers and chicken fingers.
But isn't there some kind of like Klingon Uber, like interplanetary Uber that you can call to get what you want?
Unfortunately not. I did ask one of them to go out back and dig up some earthworms to throw
that would be a good substitute.
On top of our burgers.
Right.
It's the closest thing to chach.
What is chach?
Serpent worms served live.
Ah, and I'm sure that they are much bigger than earthworms. Like, what are we talking?
Big, juicy, and they bite.
Oh, while you're eating them.
While you're eating them. They try to eat you, but they fail because we are warriors.
Okay, so that was the weekend. After the 2-day conference, there was a 4.5-day launch window. So the teams now had between Monday until noon on Friday to get their rockets cleared for flight and then launched and then recovered. And that all took place at the Launch Canada launch pads, which are about a 1.5-hour drive southwest of Timmins and spanning an area of about 25 square kilometers. So you can see on the Google map where the red pin is, that's where the launch pads are. Timmins is up at the top right. There is nothing around here but bush. And the only way to get there is by at least 20 kilometers of gravel logging roads. So if you click on any of those search filters at the top, like restaurants, hotels, things to do, nothing comes up. Okay, there's nothing going on here. Some of the students and volunteers actually camped at the launch site, even though there's no running water, there's no hydro, and the place is really dusty. There's this fine sandy dust and it gets into everything. So most of us stayed in hotels and Airbnbs in town and made the 1.5-hour drive to and from the launch pads every day. The launch site was divided into two areas, solids and advanced. The solids area, which is what you see on the slide, that was where single stage solid fuel rockets were launched, as well as smaller rockets by hobbyists who weren't part of the competition, but they were getting their rocket certification. So you can see there's 4 pads for the rocket certification. And then further down the road, okay, so there's the 4 pads. And then further down the road, that's where there was the pad for the competition rockets. And in this drone video, here we go, you can see where the pads were relative to the spectators and mission control. Mission control was on top of a storage container unit. So you can see the tents, and right behind the tent, you might be able to see it as we zoom in a bit, but behind the tent was a storage container unit. And on top of that was mission control. Okay, so that was solids. Then there was advanced. And the advanced area was honestly the coolest place I have ever been in my life. This is where the high-powered competition rockets were launched, the double-stage solid rockets, as well as the hybrid rockets. So solid propellant with liquid oxidizer, and also the entirely liquid fueled rockets. So there were 9 launch pads for these rockets, and the pads themselves were about a kilometer or so away from where us spectators were allowed to be, and also where the teams had their canopies set up so that they could get their rockets built and inspected and approved for launch. What is going to run here is just some footage of a tour that I was given of the advanced area by the advanced launch operator. And you can see him in the foreground a little bit. Amazing gentleman named Peter. This was actually a really stressful area to be in. The students had to spend hours and hours in heat and surrounded by this unrelenting blowing dust with practically no shelter, no Wi-Fi, no actual bathrooms, trying to get their rockets ready for launch and solving very difficult technical problems while trying to work as a team and not losing it on each other. But again, even in this intense and time-sensitive, high-stakes environment, the atmosphere was really supportive. Teams are helping other teams, they're sharing parts with each other, trying to solve each other's problems. It was really, really inspiring, and you really felt like you were among Canada's smartest, brightest young talent. All in all, there were 100 launches. I'm going to show you a 2-minute video of the drone footage. This was all taken from the solids pad. There is drone footage from advanced as well, but it's embedded in like 40 hours worth of live streaming, and I didn't have a chance to watch it all and extract it. But still, there were pretty high-powered competition rockets that were launched from the solids pad, and you see them towards the end. The video begins with the certification rockets and then goes into the high-powered competition rockets. So here we go.
Looking up. Winds are nominal. Skies are clear. Countdown in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Fire.
That's a technology test that you're seeing there. That is just amazing. Very cool. Okay. So, the first of the competition launches was actually by one of the two high school teams. And this team had come all the way from Vancouver. And in one of my interviews with their captain, he explains his adventures trying to get his rocket past airport security. So they were a really impressive group of kids. And for this kickoff launch, I got permission to film it from Mission Control directly behind the Solids launch officer. This is a gentleman named Chris Hobbs, and just an absolutely amazing person. And also his daughter is the captain of an all-girls rocketry team from the Bishop Strachan High School in Toronto. So just an amazing family. Anyway, joining me on this mission control container unit was the Launch Canada president, Adam Trumpour, also just incredibly inspirational person. Then there was Chris, there was a safety officer, and there was a student who was testing out his tracking camera. So there were five of us. And I'll show you my video of this just so that you can get a sense of what things looked and sounded like to us spectators on the ground. And then I'll share with you a fun little adventure that happened immediately after this launch. So here we go.
With an all skies are clear. Countdown in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition.
Okay. So right after all the cheering, that's the team down below there, the launch officer is rapidly communicating with the team down below, asking for confirmation of parachute deployment. And after about a minute, things got very quiet and everyone is looking around the sky. And of course, I have no idea what's going on. I've never done anything like this before. After what felt like a very long moment, Chris announces that the rocket has gone ballistic. And at that moment, I remember the mandatory safety training that I had attended at the conference. And I'd only been sort of paying attention, not because I wasn't aware that setting off high-powered rockets could be dangerous, but because I didn't want to know just how dangerous. I was very happy to remain ignorant of all the awful things that could happen. However, the discussion of rockets going ballistic, that had gotten my attention, mainly because I realized, oh, that's where the term going ballistic comes from. So for those of you that don't know what that means, and maybe it's just me, but a ballistic rocket is a rocket which, for any number of reasons, it doesn't deploy its parachute. And therefore it comes hurtling back to the ground at very high speeds, certainly capable of doing some pretty serious harm if it lands where you are standing. So in our safety training, we were told, stop what you are doing, come out from under tents and watch the rocket, note where it is heading. Parts might be coming toward you. Move at 90 degrees to its path if that's the case, and only after you guess where it will land. So I'm standing on this 10-foot high container unit with five strangers, and I'm looking around at my position and realizing that moving at 90 degrees in any direction means I'm falling off of this container unit. And there is no way that at my very first launch that I'm going to embarrass myself by prematurely jumping off of mission control. So I deliberately took my glasses off so that if the rocket comes our way, that someone else on the container unit will see it first and be the first to jump. Anyway, of course, we were totally fine. The rocket crashed into the bush somewhere. Obviously, that's the far more likely scenario. And the rest of the week proceeded entirely uneventfully. I should add, though, that when a rocket lands ballistically, it is very unfortunate for the team because the rocket is typically destroyed, right? It ends up in smithereens at a loss of thousands of dollars to the students. So this high school team was actually quite devastated, even though the launch itself was spectacular. Of
All skies are
Oops,
clear.
sorry. Of all of the footage that I got, my favorite was of the teams observing their launch and their huge emotional reaction to their rockets getting off the ground. So I stitched together some of that footage into a 1 minute montage for the Launch Canada social pages. I called the video the Launch Selly. And I'll show you my favorite part of that footage, which was the launch by the Ontario Tech rocketry team from Oshawa. This team had had a really challenging week. They were having some technical problems and also some interpersonal team problems. They had to do some pretty extreme reshuffling among the team, but they eventually pulled themselves together and they successfully launched their rocket on the second last day. They actually didn't think that they would get that far. So when the launch went successfully, they had a huge reaction, which I will show you.
Fire and go.
Okay, so I think that gives you a good sense of what they were feeling. Now, not only did the teams have to get their rockets off the ground, they also had to recover them, preferably still intact so that they could reuse as much of it as possible. And this meant that the students had to hike around in the surrounding bush trying to find their rockets based on its last known GPS coordinates. And for several of the teams, this required hours of hiking. And there weren't any trails in the bush, right? It was thick trees and bushes and mosquitoes. And what made this somewhat hilarious from my perspective, not having to actually do a recovery mission, is that for a lot of these students, this was their first experience ever hiking. So you had students who hadn't brought appropriate footwear or, didn't have a lot of practice with navigational skills. And so the stories I was told afterward were pretty comical. The team from Windsor, they told me that they took a few steps into the woods, realized that they were not going to be able to find their car after. So they went back to their car and they retrieved a stack of paper plates. And then they left a trail, like Hansel and Gretel left a trail of paper plates from their car into the woods so that they would be able to find their way back. So again, the teams brought their problem solving skills, and miraculously, in my mind, there were no mishaps. No one was harmed. And to my knowledge, anyway, no one was left behind. While I did not go on a recovery mission myself, I did kind of relive a recovery experience owing to a very chance encounter that I had with a woman who had been dubbed the recovery fairy godmother. And I posted the entire story on the Launch Canada Instagram site. The video is too long to share here, so I'll just quickly summarize the story, which was that there was one morning that I was on my way back to the launch site, but there was a salvo going on, like a window was open in which a bunch of rockets were being launched. And so whenever that happened, they would close all the roads coming in. So myself and a bunch of other people that wanted to get onto the site, we were all stopped at a checkpoint. We just waited there by our cars. And while we were waiting, there was this woman standing nearby, and I went over to chat with her. And she explained that there's only two residences in the whole recovery area, two cottages, and her and her sister owned one of the cottages. And so she said that she's a big fan of the Launch Canada event. They come every year. They love seeing the rockets. And she told me that a couple of years ago that there had been an incident where one of the team's rockets had landed, had parachuted onto their property. And she's telling me the story, and I'm realizing I've heard this story before because there's this like Launch Canada lore called the fairy tale recovery, which is when one of the an Alberta team there were following the GPS coordinates to recover their rocket, and it led them to this cottage. And they get there, and this woman comes out and offers to help them, and they determine that the rocket is across the a little lake, and the woman offers them their boat. The team take that goes across. They retrieve their rocket. Big celebrations, and it's just this fun story that came to be called the fairy tale recovery. So this woman is telling me the story, and I'm realizing that this is the sister of the fairy tale godmother. And so I say to her, "You're famous among Launch Canada." And she said, "Oh, why don't you come to my cottage and I'll show you where it all happened." And I'm like, "Okay." So we get in our cars. I follow her to her cottage, and she takes me through the whole thing, where the boat is, where the tree was, where the rocket landed, and it was so lovely. And then she gave me a bunch of fruits and veggies that she had grown in her garden to give to the Alberta team, which I did. And it was just like this big love fest. So a really sweet story about Launch Canada interacting in a positive way with the local community. The last bit that I would like to share is my encounter with the York rocketry team and how I hope to be able to stay involved with them in the future. This team really impressed me. They encountered a bunch of obstacles that nearly grounded them, but they refused to give up. And it was especially important to them to get their rocket off the ground because the previous year they weren't able to launch at all. And that does happen typically to a couple of teams. And it's really heartbreaking because, to have gone all that way, like it's a big, expensive trip. You go all that way, you've worked so hard all that year and all that week to the last possible moment, and then not to be able to even attempt a launch is really quite devastating. What happened to the York team was that all of the rocket motors are actually kept by Launch Canada officials because the students aren't certified in rocketry. And somehow, when the motors were packed up and they were brought to Timmins, the York team's motor was left behind and confused with an old faulty motor or something like that. I didn't totally understand what the problem was, but the team spent all of Monday and Tuesday trying to make the faulty motor work. They finally gave up, and on Tuesday night, 3 of the team members made the 7-hour drive all the way back to Toronto overnight, grabbed their motor, didn't sleep, drove all the way back to Timmins. They arrived on Wednesday morning, no sleep at all, spent all day Wednesday getting the new motor installed, and then they had a successful launch on Thursday afternoon, the last full launch day, and a successful recovery on Friday morning. And they got the 3rd place prize for their very cool payload design, which was a test of a bioluminescent algae that glows when under intense mechanical vibrations. What makes this team's performance even more impressive is that they are extremely underfunded compared to other teams, mainly because York is just a really, really big place, and it's really difficult for students to navigate all their options for funding for their projects. So I've now taken on the role as their admin supervisor, and together we're applying for grants and we're looking for more sponsorship. So if you happen to own a business or work at a business that is looking for interesting ways to get some brand recognition, I would be happy to chat with you about that. You can just reach out to me at robinthespacegirl@gmail.com. Depending on the type of sponsorship, whether it's materials or services, or maybe just a cash sponsorship, you get your logo printed on the team's t-shirts and also possibly on the rocket itself. And that gets all sorts of high profile coverage during a launch, including drone footage. But they were featured on the City TV national news. So yeah, this coverage gets out there, and it's a really cool way to get some very unique and inspiring content for your brand, right? Seeing your company logo on a rocket and ascending up into the atmosphere. The last thing I will leave you with is if you are as inspired by all of this as I am, and if you are looking for some new hobby or some new passion project, I would highly recommend checking out the Launch Canada website and perhaps clicking on that volunteer button. The organization is always grateful for volunteers, particularly people who have technical or engineering skills, as I know many RASC members have. And it is just an awesome opportunity to be part of a really important cause while using your technical skills and learning new stuff and also meeting some very cool people. Thank you.